And it's Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. You may find yourself in a similar situation. There are a number of websites where you can log on and you can ask a question that's pertinent to your financial situation. And you will get responses from 2 or 5 or 15 different financial advisors. They will give you advice to the best of their ability as to where you stand. And I thought there's a very big difference between what Adams Financial Concepts does and what other firms do. And I thought I would illustrate it today and tell you something about one of those questions which I answered in the not-too-distant past, and talk about what's going on behind the scenes with all of these questions, with all of these answers, and what some of the differences are in the approach. So I thought I would start it with just the question that was posted. And the big headline was, what are some nearing retirement tips? And a person wrote in and wrote his situation. He said, I'm a 54-year-old married man with 2 children in college. I have enough saved in a 529 along with their scholarships to provide full undergrad educations for them debt-free. Grad school is on them. My wife and I both work with an income north of $200,000 per year collectively. We have amassed about $955,000 in our 401k plans, another $100,000 in savings, and our own $350,000 home mortgage-free. Or their $350,000 home mortgage-free. We maxed out our 401k plans at $48,000 per year and also contribute to our Roth at $200 per month each. I estimate that at 65 years old, with minimal returns, we'll have about $1.3 million and are home debt-free. Is that enough? What else should we be doing? So 3 other financial advisors responded and answered and congratulated this man and his family, or man and his wife, on being financially set. As I looked at the situation, I wanted to be honest. $1.3 million seems like an awful lot of money to have at retirement age. So I wanted to respond and I wanted to be honest. I said that. $1.3 million seems like a big chunk of money. However, with only $1.3 million, you run a significant risk of running out of money. As Joe pointed out, and Joe was one of the financial advisors that responded, as Joe pointed out, a 3% withdrawal rate will earn $39,000 annually. And if you get maximum Social Security, currently $2,700 a month, a little over $2,700 a month, you will have a total income of about $100,000. That's $100,000 per year. That's a replacement of about 50% of your current income. You run the risk of running out of money in your mid-80s. The average life expectancy of a 65-year-old when you retire will be in the high 80s and maybe into the mid-90s if current trends continue. That means half the 65-year-olds will live longer than the 80s, the high 80s. The fastest growing segment of our population is the centenarians. You will need almost $4 million to maintain your current income without a risk of running out of money based on the 3% withdrawal rate. So there are really 4 options for you to consider. You can save more. It's unlikely you will get to where you need to be solely by saving more in the next 11 years. 2, you can work longer and postpone retirement. 3, you can seek better returns. And 4, you can do a combination of all of the above. I wish I could say you have all you need, but in all honesty, that would be deceiving you. You're short. $1.3 million seems like a lot of money, but you are short. If you continue to save as you are now, work 2 extra years to age 67, and achieve an 8% per year return, you should be very close to the $4 million that you will need. That does not include a margin of safety in the event there's a pandemic, in the event there's a Great Recession, in the event of high inflation, or in the event of some other black swan. If you plan to use a financial advisor, and I would recommend doing so, find one who publishes at least a 10-year track record showing a composite for all accounts with no carve-outs. And in quotes I put, some composites carve out new accounts, poor performing accounts, and terminated accounts. Be sure all of those are included. Also, be sure the track record is actual and not back-tested hypothetical returns. You're asking the right questions at the right time. You have enough time to achieve a successful retirement and enjoy your golden years. So, what I didn't write is that's the difference in making a product, dominating returns, and access. If the couple really had, instead of 1.3 million, 3.5 million, there would not have been a really big issue. But that is not the situation. 1.3 million seems like a lot of money, but 47% of people worry about running out of money, and they're right. 1.3 million is not enough to replace the 200,000. And the old rule of replacing 80% of your income may not be enough, given the increases in healthcare, given the increases in transportation, given the changes going on in lifestyle. So what is the focus? And this whole thing reminded me of a book that I'd read called The Myth of Excellence: Why Great Companies Never Try to Be the Best at Everything, written by Fred Crawford and Ryan Matthews. And I want to skip it because it really applies. They talked about companies having 5 attributes, putting them into these categories. And they're broad categories, but I think it makes sense. The categories are the price of what they do, their service for what they deliver, the access you have to the company and their products, the experience you achieve with the products, and the product itself. You know, price is not just being cheap. Price is about, and a lot of people brag about being cheap. A lot of people brag about reducing fees. But the survey of respondents shows they're looking for an honest and a fair price, something that relates to the products that they're buying, something that relates to the service and the access and the experience. On the service attribute, it's basic everyday needs. It's not all about the bells and whistles. Everyone is an individual, and they want their service custom made for them. In terms of access, it's not just location, physical, but it's psychological as well as geographical. People don't want to get confused or slowed down by clever and elaborate spins. The experience attribute, that is not entertainment. It's respect. It's being treated as a human being. It's understanding the unique products and services. You know, that's the experience. You can think of some of the high-tech things, you know, in terms of the smartphones, the iPhone or the Android phones. Those are an experience. It's not entertainment. It is an experience. And finally, the product. And just because a business believes their product is the best does not necessarily make it so. The vast majority are looking for something that's consistently good, more importantly, than being the best. Being the best may be something of focus as well. And they went on to define the 3 levels of relationship. Level 1, where trust was enough to buy the products, it's simply a transactional. Level 2 was a preference of the store or the products or the service, where customers really prefer doing business there. And level 3 is the trust is so complete that they begin to seek you out. Not only do you differentiate, but you dominate. It's interesting. Companies that actually dominate can be replaced. Richard Foster Vail, I've mentioned him a number of times, talks about companies in the Standard & Poor's in 1920 had an average life of 70 years. Now that's down to 15 years. Companies are replaced. That's part of companies that dominated can be replaced. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away. I want to relate this all back, and I want to relate this back to the person who wrote that question, 54 years old, 1.3 million when he retired. What do you do in that case? And what are the different approaches? So stick with me through this commercial break because we're going to come back and talk about that. And we're going to talk about some of the things that you hear about that may not be the best thing to hear. So I've been talking about this book, The Myth of Excellence, Why Great Companies Never Try to Be the Best at Everything, and talked about the 5 attributes, and then defining 3 levels of relationship people have with the companies or the products. And I believe in what has been said, even a dominant company can be replaced. And usually it's not by another company in their same industry. It's usually by something different. And when you think about some of the things that have happened in our short lifetime here, you know, the newspapers, which were dominated, Seattle had a morning newspaper. That was the Seattle PI. They had an afternoon paper, the Seattle Times. The papers were usually very large. Today, the PI is gone as a newspaper, paper newspaper. They have a website. The Seattle Times moved from an afternoon paper to a morning paper, and it seems to shrink. It seemed to have been shrunk quite a bit since those days 20 or 25 years ago. Think about the travel agencies. There used to be 5 or 6 travel agencies in every mall you went into. You used to see a travel agency almost on every street corner. It's seldom that you see travel agencies anymore. They're essentially gone. They've been replaced. And if you look at landlines, the smartphones have taken over. Some people don't even have a landline anymore. And in my industry, in 1986, when I started out, 95 or 98% of the financial advisors, which were called stockbrokers in those days, or bond brokers, 95% of them worked for the big firms. Today, less than half do. There's been a complete transition where the assets are growing in the registered investment advisor segment of the market and growing much more slowly, or even declining in some respects, in the big firm part of the market. And it's time, and big companies do not always succeed. So in terms of the attributes, I talked about those as well. Pardon me. Great companies do not dominate in all 5 areas. Great companies generally dominate in one of the 5 areas. One of the 5 areas. In price, in service, in access, experience, or the product. They dominate in one of those. They differentiate in a second area. If you dominate in more than one, it's not economically viable for your company to continue to exist. You price yourself out of the market. So you dominate in one, they differentiate in a second one, so a clear preference for the products or the service of what the business is doing. And great companies have to be acceptable in the other three areas. Beyond that model, it's not economically viable. Anything less than acceptable doesn't work. Has to be at least acceptable, but in one area to differentiate and one to dominate. And if you look at where we are, I oftentimes relate that to Adam's financial concepts, because our value proposition is very clear. It's something that very few financial advisors do. We dominate in terms of performance. Very, very few financial advisors can deliver the kind of performance that we've been delivering to our clients. And yes, past performance is no guarantee of future results, but we have a track record, and it's a proven track record, and it covers all our clients with no carve-outs. Anyone who has had an account for at least one full quarter is part of that, and any client that is terminated is part of that. Poor performing accounts are included with the best performing accounts, and most of the accounts are pretty close to beating the Standard & Poor's, if not above that. In fact, the document that we sign with our clients says that we will strive in every account to beat the Standard & Poor's 500. In January, when we sent out performance reports to our clients for the year ended 2020, we actually said, this is what your account has done. This is what it would have been if it was invested in the Standard & Poor's 500. And with a couple of exceptions, everyone exceeded the S&P 500. And those exceptions were very conservative accounts, which included, to some degree, some bonds. So that's clearly where we dominate in our segment of the industry. And where we differentiate in our service as well. We provide very, very exceptional service. Not dominating service, but very acceptable. And in the other three, we're very acceptable. So how does it really apply? You know, for us, it's pretty clear. I went to a conference in Florida. I really wanted to see Rick Edelman. If you look, Susie, Jim Cramer is the most recognized financial person in the country. Over half the people know who Jim Cramer is. Susie Orman, over 30% of Americans recognize, or of investors recognize the name Susie Orman. And Rick Edelman is in the single digits in recognition, but the number 3 name. So I went to Florida to hear him speak one afternoon. He spoke for lunch, he spoke for the afternoon. It was something that I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear how he structured his program, because he has a growth plan, and he's generating 25,000 leads per year. He does a radio show, just like I do a radio show, but he also does a TV show. He does 800 seminars per year. He cultivates the media, and he writes a book every single year. And I want to come back to 800 seminars per year, because he delivered a seminar that afternoon. In his seminar, he came on at the beginning of the seminar and said, please hold your questions until the end. We'll be back to take your questions at the end. Please just listen to what I have to say, and then I'll come back. And I'm convinced that that entire seminar, until the very end, was simply a video. It was not the real Rick Edelman. It was a video. It was a canned presentation. And at the end, he did come on and personally answer questions. But I believe that that half hour he allowed for questions was the only time in which he was live. And he was searching for. His presentation was all about how you could come to work for him as an advisor and how things would be structured. He has 130 some advisors. He has 30 or 40 offices around the country. But the entire approach is a cookie-cutter approach, right down to the office layout. You know, the office is laid out with the finance advisor with his desk facing the window so that when he's working, he's facing the window. And behind the advisor is a coffee table, and behind the coffee table is a couch. So when a couple comes in to meet, and assuming it's mostly couples, they come in to meet with the advisor spins his chair around and is facing the people across the coffee table. And on that coffee table are only Rick Edelman materials. No Wall Street Journal, no books, because in the Wall Street Journal there might be a negative article. In a book, there might be something controversial. The only thing that is allowed to be on that table are Rick Edelman manufactured materials. And through this whole process, 75% of the clients say Edelman is the best company they've ever worked with among all the companies. And not just brokerage. It includes companies like Nordstrom and Starbucks. But you know what? Of the 5 quality measures, its access really dominates. There's nothing confusing, nothing elaborate, nothing clever. It's just very basic, cookie cutter, and always consistent. In experience, that's the differentiator. It's respect, not entertainment. People are treated well. The service is adequate. They do what they say, and they're consistent. And every single plan is geared toward the individual investors. It's cookie cutter, but everyone takes their data, and it's done on the computer. Price is average. It has been dropping along with the rest of the industry. And the product is adequate. It's consistently good financial plans with no focus on being the best or actually meeting the criteria. If you did a financial plan with Edelman, that $1.3 million would be just fine. And he's been successful. That's where Edelman is. He mentioned that at one time there was an advisor who was sick. Another advisor stepped in, made exactly the same presentation, because every presentation is exactly the same. Every single presentation is exactly the same. The only difference is the computer-generated report financial plan. You put in your own numbers, and the plan generates exactly the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're an advisor in Seattle, an advisor in Florida, an advisor in Cincinnati, Ohio, or anywhere else. The plan is always the same. The layout of the office is always the same. The whole focus is always the same. It's consistent, and it dominates. The access dominates. It's been a successful plan. I think ours is much more client-oriented. We'll come back to that right after the commercial break. Stay with me. So I've been talking about the difference between a firm like Rick Edelman, where everything is exactly cookie cutter. Everything is consistent. Everything is built to give the same flavor, no matter where you live, no matter who you are. It's just taking your numbers, plugging them into the computer, and spitting out that cookie cutter report. And it works okay. I believe that we're unique in the fact that our focus is on producing returns, producing those returns that gets to the client or the person that asked the question in the first place. We want to get that client to $4 million, and we want to build beyond that so that they have a margin of safety so they can exist through a pandemic, so that they can exist through a great recession, so they can exist through a high inflation period of time, or any of the other black swans. We want to see that our clients have that margin of safety, and we want to be sure that they have enough that they're not going to have to change the quality of their life when they get into their 80s and 90s and 100s. That's the difference between Edelman and Adams. And we're not there to congratulate some people that they made or they're going to retire with 1.3 million. We think that that's a shortfall. And we want to see people retire and never change their quality of life. One of the things that's done by a lot of advisors, and it was addressed in an article in Investment News. And I want to talk about this. Because in Investment News, the article was sponsored by Athena, which is a company that generates annuities. And the article was written specifically to financial advisors. Investment News is a magazine that goes to investment advisors. It's a subscription magazine, so that's not free like some of the others are. Subscription to Investment News. And the article was titled, Discover the 10 Common Behavior Biases Against Annuities and the Solutions for Overcoming Them. You've heard me talk a lot about annuities, and I'm going to talk more, but I'm going to begin and talk about the behavior biases against annuities. And the article says there are 4 questions that people have. How long will I live? Number 2, how much money will I need to cover that amount of time? Number 3, how would an annuity perform for me compared to other investments? And number 4, am I understanding all of this properly? And it goes on to talk that there's significant biases against annuities. And if you listen to me very often, I will tell you that I'm not quite there, but I'm not far from Ken Fisher, who says I'd rather die than sell an annuity. But anyway, let me go back to the article, the biases. Number 1, people, according to Athena in this article, people feel that annuities are overpriced. Number 2, they feel that they don't compensate for inflation. Number 3, people prefer to share the risk with family. They want to pool their money. Number 4, the bias why people don't buy annuities is they want to leave money to their heirs. Number 5, they want to insure against longevity through other means than an annuity. Number 6, having people who have a large sum of money, like the 1.3 million mentioned at the beginning of the program, large sums are illusionary and create the impression that you don't need an annuity. Also, a bias is that there's unrealistic optimism that they can do better than the annuity companies. Another bias is they want to avoid talking about death. Another bias is there's an aversion against loss. And of course, another bias is they're just financially illiterate. They're dumb. And finally, there's an inertia. All those biases, it says, you need to be ready to overcome those. And if you've been listening to me for a period of time, you know I do not like annuities. They have a place, but that's for very few people. Annuities are oversold. And Helen Olin, who wrote a book called Pound Foolish, Exposing the Dark Side of the Finance Industry, said that there's 2 things about annuity. First, they're increasingly sold to baby boomers and now Gen X, people who are worried about running out of money. Go back to my question at the beginning. Go back to the comment that I started with. Worried about whether they're going to have enough money, worried about running out of money. And secondly, they're so complicated and they're so difficult to understand, and there's so many financial penalties that they're sold for one and only one reason, and that's to make money for financial advisors. And the commissions go to verify that. Commissions on an annuity can be as much as 14%. And if they're being sold through another company, if they're being sold through a broker-dealer, if they're being sold through a registered investment advisor, that commission is not only going to go to the financial advisor, it's going to go to the financial advisor's company as well. I've seen companies take as much as 6 or 7% in addition to what the advisor gets. So a 14% commission might be split, 7% to the company, 7% to the advisor. Or if it's as low as 8%, it's 4% to the advisor and 4% to the company. And that's just the commission basis on it. Rarely, according to Helen Owen, rarely is it in the best interest of the client. A few times there are. I had a person who talked to me about managing their money, wanted to open an account. And as I dug into their history, what he said was that when his father died, his father had migrated to Arizona, bought a house in Arizona, and this client lived on the East Coast, and so did his parents for a while. He grew up in Idaho, parents lived in Idaho, they moved back to the East Coast, the parents followed them to the East Coast, and then the parents actually retired to Arizona. And when his father died, his mother passed away before, when his father died, he sold the house and collected a few $100,000. And in a period of less than 2 years, buying mobile homes, buying this, buying that, they completely went through that amount of money. They could have set it aside, let it grow. And at the time they were in their 40s, I believe, that could have grown to well over $1 million. Well, maybe into $2 or $3 million. But that's where they were. And they went through the money in less than 2 years. Now he had a big settlement because he had an on-the-job accident, and there was a big settlement, several $100,000. And he came to me and asked me if I could manage the money. And looking at the track record and talking to him, I recommended he do, and they do, an annuity. There was one and only one reason, and that is that they put the money away, that it paid a monthly amount for the remainder of their lives. And since I don't do annuities, I'm not insurance licensed, and so I recommended they talk to someone else. That's the only case, and I believe that there are people who need that. There are people who get a lump sum of money and go through the money. I remember having another client who had a medical malpractice. She was just 21 years old, had a hysterectomy that she didn't need, had a settlement of $250,000, and when she had that and we met, she wanted to invest with me. She'd heard about me, heard about what I did. And I said, as we sat and we had lunch, I explained to her, you're going to hear from friends that you never knew you had. You're going to hear from relatives you never knew you had. They're all going to have great ideas. They're all going to have things where you cannot lose. I said, you should send them to me and I will take care of it. Well, her sister needed, and her new husband wanted to buy a house. They didn't have the credit to buy the new house, so they needed to borrow the money from her. They also had a chance to buy some acreage in a rural area. And she said, comparing it to the acreage in a big city where they live close to, she said it's really cheap. And I said, there's a reason why it's really cheap. But she used the money there. And she had a friend who had a can't-miss deal. Put the money there, it missed. She went through $250,000. She could have been set for the rest of her life. Yes, it's horrible to have a malpractice suit, but she could have been through that and out of that. In her case, I wish I would have recommended an annuity, but there are certain people. But most people, the advantage is one and only one reason, and that's to make money for the financial advisors and for the financial advisors' companies. It's rarely in the best interest of the client. Very, very, very not in the best interest. We're coming to a commercial break. I want to finish off, when you come back to the commercial break, finish off talking about the annuities and life insurance to be sure that you get the right thing. Don't go away. So I've been talking about this whole idea, started with a question from a man who wrote in and asked and said that he had 1.3 million. Was that enough? And three advisors said, oh, you've got plenty and you're in good shape. I wrote back and said, no, you're short. But that led me to talking about the differences between Adams Financial Concepts and other companies, and that led me to talking about annuities, which I believe are not for anyone except a very, very few people. And I believe that that's also true of universal life insurance. And I think it's sold on the basis of providing for your family. And I believe when you're young, you should have term life insurance. I believe there's a place for term life insurance in many people's lives. But I don't believe that's oversold. And there was recently a suit filed against Pacific Life and their PDX product. They're being sued by the regulators. And I think it gives great insight into what the insurance companies and the agents do. It's a class action suit. You can Google the suit. It's Hong Lee versus Pacific Life. Class action suit, you can read the whole thing, and if you read the whole thing, it will probably terrify you because it's life insurance. It's not an annuity, but the same principles apply. It's sold under and being accused of defrauding the people who bought the insurance and deceiving all of those people. It was an intentional misrepresentation of what the product was and did. They're being sued because they breached their fiduciary duty. And they're being sued for professional negligence. The product was the PDL-IUL. It is risky, it's the most leveraged, and it's practically impossible to understand. It was impossible for agents not to sell because the illustrations are the very best in the industry. They show how you benefit. If you buy this product, no one has a better product according to their illustrations. Those tables that the agent shows how well the policy will do over the next 20 years. And the claim is that the product will produce outsized returns. It will produce returns which no one can match. Yes, we put up our performance. It's not an illustration. It's not a model. Yes, we produce outsized returns. Working remotely ends up giving phone calls today. Anyway, that's another question. Sorry for the interruption. Anyway, back to this. We produce and we show our results. We put them up. We publish our results, but they're actual client returns. They're not a forecast into the future. They're not an illustration. They're not hypothetical. With the Pacific Life product, the PDX IUL was an illustration of what's going to happen for the next 20 years. And the illustration was based on an incredible performance. The index they used a mysterious, what they called, performance factor. And nowhere in all the documents you receive if you sign for one of these, nowhere is the performance described, what it is, or how it's derived. They don't even tell you what formula is used. This product is using call options, which they estimate will generate 50% profits on every single transaction that they do. A 50% profit using call options. And they use that to justify very high fees. If it was true, the fees would be justified. If it was actual, you could say the fees would be justified. It's not actual. It's an estimate. It's a hypothetical. It's a forecast. And it's based on something that they don't even explain what it is. And they never disclose that call options and leverage create significant amount of risk, and none of that is ever disclosed. And if the policies have a negative return, because they're talking about investing in call options, and if they have a negative return, and they will from time to time, either you as the owner have to pay more money in premiums to make up the loss, or the policy lapses. So if you buy a $1 million policy and the returns are not good, you may have to put up another 100,000 or 50,000 to make up the losses. The policies, in addition, have added bells and whistles. And the agents who are selling this earn up to 3 times higher commissions to steer customers into taking the options. So the normal percentage that an agent might receive, which is maybe 4% on a $1 million policy, they can earn up to 12 or 14% based on convincing you to take extra options. So all of that. And in addition to that, they can be hyper-funded, which I think is very interesting. When I bought my first life insurance policy when I was 21 years old, I did it as a hyper-funded. And I did it through a scoutmaster because he was selling insurance. And he convinced me, a former scoutmaster convinced me that I needed to do this. And I believed, because after all, he was a scoutmaster. He was an insurance agent, and he convinced me that I should do this. What you do is you make the first few years of payments, and you build up cash value. And then you borrow against the cash to pay the ongoing premiums. So it sounds like you're getting life insurance for no cost after 2 or 3 years. And I didn't understand that. I was in my 20s. I bought that. I hyper-funded it. And what I didn't realize is that for 25 years, what the impact would be. It created up to 5 times the commission for my former scoutmaster. And if I died, the loan and all the interest that would be subtracted from the death benefit. So I got to borrow my own money, but I had to pay interest on it, and the agent made 5 times the normal commission. What a deal! Had I realized, what a deal! My agent made 5 times the commissions. I get to borrow my own money, and I get to pay insurance interest on the money that I borrow. What a deal! And now you can begin to see why, in my financial advisor career, I gave up my insurance license a long time ago. It took me less than a year once I got into this business. There are reasons to have life insurance. There may be a particular case where someone needs an annuity, but these things are sold, and they add bells and whistles, and they give you illustrations. It's made to take advantage of the consumer. Yes, there's cases where you need insurance. There's cases where some people may need an annuity. That's all fine and good. But you have to really, really be careful of what you're getting. Anyway, that wraps up our program. Have a very wonderful week, and I will be back next Saturday talking about more pleasant things. And if you missed any part of this program or any part of previous programs, you can find them on YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in About Money, and you can find the programs right there. Have a very wonderful weekend, rest of the weekend and week. I will be back next Saturday to talk about money.